Hi, everyone. Lou McGrone from Walk in Sunshine Charity. I want to thank everyone for joining us on our brief messaging series. Really excited today. We have Enza Chirimi with us, who is a licensed social worker. She has an MS in her field, very passionate about grief, bereavement work, and has worked with a lot of families regarding trauma and loss. So she's going to be a great addition today. As well as Gino Marandino, operator of a small family business, 20, it's Marandino Cemetery Care. They operate in 20 states. They currently do 1 in 650 burials in this country, and they take care of about 2% of the burials overall in this country. He also has the privilege of the title of the Dean of the Land College for the International Cemetery Care Foundation. So he's also an expert in his field. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us, Lou.
So to jump right into it, I guess, Gino, are you willing to share for a minute or two, maybe a little bit about how we connected and a little bit about, and I'll color it in as well with Walk in Sunshine and your passion around this field regarding grief, loss, parents, families, and specifically infant loss.
Sure, Lou. That was a interesting way that we met. We were at a Christmas party, and I was introduced to you by both my client and good friend, Rick Ralph, who is the director of Fairview Cemetery. Fairview Cemetery is the crown jewel and one of the most beautiful arboretum and cemeteries in the Northeast. And that is, they're one of our clients that we take care of their grounds. And so, and that is the place of memory for your son. And so we were introduced there, and I was looking for a not-for-profit that would help support families that are going through this grief and to help them with the financial burden of performing burials on their children. And so you turned up there miraculously, and it's been great to know you and use you as a resource since. So that's how we met. That's my version on how we met.
And thanks, Gino. And I think one of the reasons why I was interested in learning more about what you do was kind of how Walk in Sunshine started. And after our loss of our stillborn son, Joseph, something that bothered me every time I went to Fairview Cemetery was the lack of headstones in the infant section. And having consulted with Rick Ralph there, I asked why. And one of the main reasons was money. And maybe these families are ready to potentially pay for formula, for diapers, but for a burial, the cost can be significantly more. And I just did not want that to be a barrier for anyone to be able to give what they deem appropriate in terms of a funeral or a place to rest for their child. And it just stuck with me, and it just kept, picking at me. And I was like, I need to change that. And then to hear about your prominence in your field, I said, hey, this was something that Walk in Sunshine was kind of founded on. I need to learn about Gino and his business and just keep the lines of communication open. And we've done that for about the last year or so. And then Gino was fortunate enough to introduce me to Enza. And so maybe if you'd be willing to share kind of your connection with Enza and some of the skills and talents she brings to the table.
Yeah, sure. So I've known Enza since she's a child. She happens to be my cousin,
Yes.
but don't hold that against her, Lou. Yeah, but she's also my god sister. Her godmother and my godmother are the same, so we have this special connection in that way. And I've watched Enza through her adolescence to her high school and college years, and she's always had a passion for helping the underdog and helping people in crisis and trouble. And so she has an incredible academic career uh, with ending in an Ivy League school, and she's used every single bit of her resources and network to help families out. And last I checked, social workers don't make a ton of money, so she's all in it for the right reasons. And she's helping us with this Holy Innocent project that we're doing to supply free burials and support people like you who want to do this throughout the country. And she's our liaison with the other social workers in the medical field. And so far, the results have been incredible. And we look forward to many years more with her. So, yeah.
Thank you, Gina. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys to collaborate. I think I just see a great future of people that are going to be touched by what you're both doing and the work we're doing together.
Well, thank you, Enzo. Besides being Gino's cousin, I mean, has he taught you anything over the years?
Many things. And it's so interesting that we are here together, working together, because one of the beautiful aspects of this is knowing that we're on a journey, and that God places people on your path to help you, to celebrate in the good times, but also to be there when things are hard. So it's such a privilege to be able to walk with him in this. And yes, so I could sit here for a long time and tell you, but that's the crux of it.
Sure. So I guess, Gino, with your background in the cemetery space, and I know you've shared personally with me prior to this Zoom meeting about Heart Island being something you're very passionate about. There's so many directions we could go here, but maybe you could give us a little bit of history on kind of your business and how you've seen funerals for babies and young children evolve or not evolve, and kind of what your role has been in that, and kind of clue us in for those who, because often for families, it's new, you don't know, and you're just coming into this new world, and you've been an expert in it. So we're happy to hear what your thoughts are and what your experience has been.
Sure. So a big part of what we do, Lou, is we are there to support the committal service of families as they perform a burial, mausoleum, cremation, or full casket burial in a cemetery. And there's patterns that we see, and somebody who's passed away that's in their 80s will have a funeral and a committal service, and that will be, there'll be several people or maybe lots of people. As the younger the person is, they seem to have plenty of support, and people come out to see them. A high school teacher, or a student, you'll see buses of people come in to commemorate that life. But the saddest ones are the ones that we have personal experiences with, and that's when somebody buries a child. It's such a private and such a sad moment that even seasoned grave diggers are incredibly touched by this loss, and empathize with these families, because it's just something that is so out of the norm, and there's such a deep, profound grief there that we end up sharing in that grief in a very intimate way with the families that we serve. So the challenge is prenatal loss. Prenatal loss just works differently, because it happens. Nobody's preparing. Mostly, nobody prepares for prenatal loss. It ends up surprising the family, so there's no pre-grief to the death that happens, or reconciliation, or none of the grief process is combined with a big surprise, and that surprise is unwelcomed, and really it ends up being a very sad moment. And then many years later, people come to the cemetery and they'll ask for if, you know, if they'll lose their unborn child, and they may not know what cemetery they're buried in. They may not know if the child had a burial. They may not know if the child is in a city cemetery like Hart Island, and it just compounds the loss. And I see people in their 80s come back to the cemetery looking for their unborn children. And we really want to make sure that we do something about that. And with what you're doing and what we're trying to accomplish, I think we'll make big headways.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, the loss never goes away, right? It's always with you. And I think at times people may look at it or view it or acknowledge it kind of differently. But the fact that you're actively working on making sure that the arrangements are as peaceful and as appropriate and as beautiful as possible, even if it's not 100% understood or welcomed at the time due to the trauma, I think is amazing. Because, you know, like you said, people 80 years old coming back to look for their children, that's just got to be a really, really intense moment.
It is low, yeah.
Enza, help us color this in for us, the lay person here, in terms of a little bit of an experience you've had in this area.
So the research shows how important it is for parents to have an opportunity to acknowledge the life of their child, no matter how young. And I think what you're speaking to, both of you, is that you want a place to remember that your child's life is significant, even if it was short-lived. And so people need an opportunity to grieve. And part of that, like you said, there's shock and there's trauma in the moment. And what we want to do is give people resources so that the loss doesn't go away. And you want to be able to commemorate their life and be able to go back and talk about this child, however long you had them. So this is why it's so important. Like Gino said, people going back in their 80s, that's significant. That shows that has stayed with them. And in the past, historically speaking, it was really swept under the rug. I think people were trying, well-intentioned and wanted to help parents in their grief and their pain, and just tried to whisk it all away. This didn't happen. But it did happen, and it changes you, and it needs to be acknowledged in order to help parents grieve in a healthy way, because it affects so many different aspects of a person's just emotional health, spiritual health, physical health. So,
absolutely, I echo everything you said. It was spot on. I guess, Gino, your passion around prenatal loss, perinatal loss, young children, why? What has drawn you to that group, and personally, have what maybe are some of the things that have occurred in your life that keep you passionate about it?
Lou, when my parents came from Italy to the United States, mom was 7 months pregnant. And so when we landed, not much long after that, she had lost my sisters. And so that loss was talked about in the family from time to time, but very rarely. And it took about 30 years for us to find where those babies were buried. And they were, the thought was that they were both stillborn. And as it turned out, because they weren't both stillborn, they were given a burial. And so many times children that are stillborn or miscarried in a hospital will end up either in a mass grave or end up as processed through a system that, that unrecoverable, or that somebody can't go back and visit. And because one of my sisters had lived an hour before after she was born, she was given a death certificate, and the other sister was not. But because they were together, they were both buried together. And so that created a paper trail that we were able to find, and memorializing them and naming them posthumously. Even after my parents had separated, I had gone back to Italy, and we named the both girls after my grandmothers, both my mother's side and my father's side. And I got to see firsthand when my mother went to see the memorial of her daughters. It was like 1,000 pounds was taken off of her shoulders. And same with my father. When we named those children, I saw a smile come to my father's face in his 80s that I had not seen for 30, 40 years. It meant something to them. And I had no idea that in my own life, I would experience perinatal loss. Our first pregnancy, my wife and I, was fairly easy up until 15 minutes prior to Francesca was induced. And then the doctor brought us in and said, I got good news and bad news. The good news is that the bad news is that your child is swimming in her meconium and she's under stress and she might not make it. The good news is you're going to be parents in 15 minutes. And they right away had performed the C-section. And so Lucia's a healthy 12-year-old today. We should have named her Trouble because she's more trouble than Lucia. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of people could say that about their kids, right? She could probably say it about her dad too. But the second pregnancy wasn't as successful. And so when we found out that we were pregnant, it was, we had settled that we were just a one-child family. And once we found out that we were pregnant, that it just opened up a whole, like I could see us packing the SUV up and going on camping trips and just being a much more robust family than we were. And it just brought so much joy to me. I didn't expect our family was going to grow in this way. And then the time came where we went to the doctors and we found out that the nurse looked really troubled. She excused herself, brought back the doctor, and that's when we found out that there was no heartbeat. And that, like for so many families, was incredibly devastating. And that it's just created a sense of urgency for me to help families through that and support them. And there's no delusions that I could make this pain go away for families. Just knowing that I might make that burden a little lighter for them is such a huge success for me. There's over 650,000 miscarried children a year pre 20 weeks of gestation. And I think, is it 20,000, Lou, that of post 20 weeks, I think, stillborn?
Yeah, 25 maybe. I guess
25.
It's a lot. Yeah, either way, that's a lot of kids.
It's a lot of kids. And people call these, they may call it a fetus, they may call it a product of conception. There's tons of political names that you would call it. But for Francesca and I, it was our child. And the ability to go to the cemetery and visit our child was incredibly important to us. And maybe because we're informed and we know how important it is to so many people to go back and find their lost child, but it was very important to us. And even though it was just me, her, and the priest and the foreman at the cemetery the day of the burial, that moment is etched in my brain forever. and it was our goodbye to this expanded family on earth. And, you know, because of our faith system, maybe we believe that there's something more, and that that child isn't completely lost, just in a different dimension, a different place. And there's comfort in that, that that child isn't forgotten. And it's comfort that that child will always be with us. So.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think two things that really struck a chord with me was that when Francine and I had our loss, and I had asked a friend who went through a similar situation as us, and I said, you know, how does it feel a year later, and what are you doing? He shared that, you know, he would go to the cemetery and get out a basic folding like lawn chair and get a cup of coffee and read the newspaper and just spend time. So I think absolutely having the physical place, and if you just want to sit there and in silence, read a newspaper or whatever it is extremely important. But I think the one thing I'll be interested in Enza's thoughts on, as another man and from man to man, something I've have heard in talking to dads like us is that fantasy of what the family would have been like. And I don't know, I'm sure the women and the moms feel the same way, but it seems like it's a stronger feeling for the dads, especially we're coming out of, you know, this is about a week or two after Father's Day that we're filming this. Like, it's with you on that day, and it's, you know, it's with you on all days, but that fantasy about the SUV, the, you know, would this child have been good at soccer? Would they have been smart?
Yeah.
That's really real, I think, for the men that might be watching.
Yeah, I think, Lou, what you're saying is common to men and women in the sense that you have a vision and a hope for that child's life, and you have a vision and a hope for your family, and you start building that way before the child's born, right? As soon as you find out that you're going to be having another child, you have that natural desire. You're just thinking about, wow, like, what's it going to be like, you know? And so that is a loss, you know, when people just, it's not so simple. It's not just, people will say things to make you, you know, try to, there's no words. I mean, there's obviously nothing that's going to make it okay, but, you know, people will say, well, you might have another child, or you might, you know, look at you already, what you already have, but it doesn't change the fact that you have now lost this dream. You've lost this hope, and that's part of the grieving process. You had this vision, and it's letting that go. And then coming home, I know I just had a cousin of mine, second cousin, and she lives far away, but it was very painful. She had a stillborn, and going home to that nursery, going home and seeing all the things that she prepared for that child, and having to release that, and was her first child as well. So it's a process. Yeah, it's a process, and it's grieving hopes and dreams lost.
So Enza, to that point, what is the best, or what are some of the best words or phrases to share to someone that has just gone through a loss that of a baby that, of course, is usually unexpected, and
Yeah.
thing is, I think during that pregnancy you're ramping up the excitement.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is different than, you know, grandma or whatever having, you know, cancer, and, you know, you kind of
Different experience.
this one, the outcome is supposed to be really positive. So I think it's a little bit more of a spike down on the crash.
Yes.
And I know, you know, I don't want to speak for Gino, but I know personally, like, yeah, so many people said so many things that were out of touch and borderline inappropriate, and I know they didn't mean to. So I guess what are some suggestions that maybe you've heard of that might be worth sharing?
Sure. Well, one is that, like you said, people are well-intentioned, but sometimes it's like they give you a sucker punch to the stomach, and they say something that you're just kind of in shock that even came out of their mouth.
Yeah.
And they mean well. So I know I've seen in the research, and even for medical professionals, it's totally appropriate to just say, I'm so sorry. I am sorry. And that doesn't, for the medical professional, that doesn't somehow mean that they're guilty of something. It's just, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for your pain. I'm sorry, that you're going through this. And the importance of giving people space and being able to talk about it. I think that's what I've seen with a lot of the research in grief in general, but especially when you're losing a child, people are scared to say the wrong thing, because sometimes we do. And I know I've heard parents say, my in-laws also lost a child younger, not she was in her 40s. And what my mother-in-law has said is that she felt like she could not talk about her daughter anymore. And you need to be able to talk about it. I think that you need to give people permission to talk about it and to sit in the awkwardness and the pain. It's okay. It's okay. This child lived. This child is important to you, and you don't have to just get over it. That's what people, sometimes it's just because we're uncomfortable with the grief. So we want you to get over it because we don't know what to do with it, And so I think, what's helpful is just to sit and listen sometimes. You don't need to say anything. And you could say, I have no idea what to say. I'm just going to sit with you and listen. And sometimes just sitting with people in their pain and allowing them to remember their hopes and dreams and to share what they're going through is all that you can do. And that's what they need.
Absolutely. I think that's spot on. What I've heard from many other professionals is just acknowledging it and spending time and acknowledging the life that was lost as well. I think, Gino, if you're going to let me, I'd like to kind of pivot. We were kind of talking before we started recording. Do you want to share about kind of this past Father's Day? Because it's something I think about in terms of sharing about loss to other children. Is that something we could touch on for a minute?
Sure. Lou, it's 7 years after our loss. And so Lucia was only 4 or 5 years old when we had the loss. And so it just never seemed appropriate the timing just didn't seem right to let her know. And this Father's Day was the day that I was gonna go visit the grave and bring her and introduce her to her sibling. And so I was really nervous about it because one, I didn't want to taint every Father's Day that she'd ever have. Second, I would want her to try to imagine a positive experience from this, of knowing that she had a sibling. And I also, wanted to be sensitive to my wife, because my wife had not been to the grave since the day of the funeral. So with all of that happening, she agreed that we would go visit the cemetery. And so as we were driving, I was preparing Lucia for the visit and just talking about other friends of hers that had children in heaven and what they went through. And we talked a little bit about it. We talked about my sisters, which she knows about, and we've gone to visit those graves in the past. So she knows what an important part of my life my sisters are. And as we got closer to the graveside, that's when I introduced her, and my wife introduced her to her sibling. And she was, she kind of smiled and she said, I had a feeling that something like this was, that you guys had a miscarriage. And so she started asking a lot of questions, a lot of technical questions, like, is this my only sibling? When did it happen? Was it at night? Was it during the day? How far along in the pregnancy? So she asked some very adult questions that aren't actually bad to ask when you're talking to somebody who's had a loss. What happened is a great way to get people to start talking about their loss. And she's our little therapist, I suppose. But so she started asking the right questions. And, the outcome was, we cleaned the grave off a little bit, and we put some seed on there to get it ready for the summer. And she participated in cleaning up her sibling's grave, and we talked about it a little bit afterwards. And every day she wanted to dye her hair pink, thinking that's her little sister. And so she's mourning her sibling in her own special way. And I really am grateful that it went as well as it did. And anybody who has another child, I think when the time is right, and you'll know when the time is right, to introduce them to their sibling in a very slow and methodic way, will be a great way to expand their understanding of what their real family is, and participate in your mourning and participate in that child. And I think that makes it all that much more special for the child who's lost, that they're introduced to their sibling as well. I think there's something special about that.
Thank you for sharing, Gino. Let me ask you, what did it do for you to share that after all these years?
Yeah, it first of all, it almost, because I was the one who picked the memorial, I was the one who would go back and check on the grave, and nobody else in the family was ready for that. It kind of made me feel isolated, and it's not a topic you can just pick up very easily. Even designing the memorial, had been done in bits and pieces, because it was very difficult to bring the topic up in a way that was meaningful to my wife. And so I feel like, we're not packing up the SUV to go camping, but as a family, we're going to go to the cemetery and we're going to grieve together, which may be a little bit more meaningful, and there's more growth that comes out of that or an equal amount of growth maybe that comes out of that than going on a camping trip. Sharing your burdens and your sadness, I think, are just as important as, or sometimes more important, than sharing your good times with your family. So I feel like that burden's been lifted for me a little bit, and it's carried a little bit by my daughter and a little bit by my wife, for sure, by my wife. Yeah.
Well, I'm touched that you guys did that, and I know it meant a lot to you and your family, and I think it's a really special moment that I'm sure Lucia will remember for a long time. So I think at this point we have so many more things we could touch on based on all our passion, but for the time being, maybe just cut it at this point, and we could resume and pick up in the following weeks, and maybe do a part 2 if that's something that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, that'd be great, Lou, for sure.
Well, guys, thank you for joining me today and helping promote everything that you guys stand for in terms of loss and support and grief and Walk in Sunshine, and I thank you guys tremendously for it.
Thank you, Lou. Thanks for letting us be part of it.
Yes,
Thank you. All right, take care, guys.
You too.